You're listening to the DVM Podcast Empire. Now with over 1 million downloads. 1 million downloads. Find us online at DVMPE.com.
100% free.
1,000,000% fan. And now, push the button.
Is it possible that we have permitted ideology, political and economic philosophies, and governmental policies to keep us from considering the very real, everyday problems of our people?
So what if my feelings are hurt? Does that give me the right to prevent others from expressing their opinions?
Wait a second, Doc. Are you telling me this sucker is nuclear?
Hey, can you push the button?
Do not touch that button.
Hey, can you push the button?
Do not touch that button.
Hey, can you push the button?
Do not touch that button.
Mr. Anderson.
Don't push it.
Hey everybody, welcome back once again to Push the Button Podcast, your number one podcast for all things that get you hot. I am your host, David Vox Mullen.
And I'm your other host, Mr. Anderson.
And today, we're going to be talking about whatever the hell we want to, because this is our show, and that's what we can do with it. Okay, so for some of you who have been unaware of what we are and what we do, you may have come to us because of the new commercial you would have heard on the DVM Podcast Empire, which is hilarious. Ken and myself, we just did a commercial, and that was fun, dude. We just kind of improvised it on the fly, and it worked out pretty nice.
It's not very humble, David, to say that it's hilarious.
Oh, damn it.
We have to allow other people to say that about us.
Hey, I want everyone to know how humble I am. I'm going to take out an ad on Facebook that just has a picture of my face, and it just says, humble guy.
You know who's humble?
This guy. Oh, that's so perfect. So what's going on in the world today, man? We've got still Ebola crisis. I saw a really funny political cartoon this morning. It was a big fat American who's got, a giant 32-ounce soda in his hand, and he's got cigarettes, and he's got a bunch of food. It's talking about the caloric intake of the food is like really high, and he's smoking, and he's, drinking sugar soda, and obviously doesn't care. And then he just goes, Ebola? Like he's worried about that. I was like, ooh, touche.
That's funny.
It was very well done. But so the Ebola thing is getting kind of crazy here. We just had an incident where I guess the nurse who was in Texas who had Ebola contacted the CDC, informed them that she wasn't feeling well, but that she was taking care of the Ebola patient. She was about to go on a flight. She asked if she should. The CDC said, go ahead, take your flight, only to find out later she definitely had Ebola, or currently does have Ebola. And though the country is up in arms because CDC said, nah, sure, go ahead, take a flight. Just hop on a plane and carry it somewhere else.
I don't understand. We're very uncertain about this disease right now. We're not sure that I've read that the disease can't be spread in any other way other than saliva, sweat, any other bodily fluids, basically. Blood, semen, feces, whatever.
One of those fluids is my favorite.
It is?
Yeah, I'll stick with sweat. How about that one?
Okay. I was going to say, which one?
None of them are very good. None of them are good at all.
So, basically, when I did some digging, I found out that, look, it can't be spread unless you have contact with one of these fluids, one of these bodily fluids. It doesn't spread through the air. And if somebody contracts the disease, if they can be a carrier of the disease, and the only time that they become, have the ability to transmit the disease to somebody else is when they're actually experiencing symptoms themselves. When they start having the shits and the sweats and all that stuff. But just walking around, you're supposedly not supposed to be able to contract it. Now, I've also heard recently that they're unsure of this, that they're saying that there's a possibility that this disease that the virus actually mutates and has mutated to the point where it can be contracted in other ways. So,
well, I'll tell you what. Just in the interest of education, I have up here in front of me the website for the CDC, cdc.gov, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. This is the best, allegedly the best source of information we as Americans can get on this disease. They basically describe the transmission of Ebola. It says, because the natural reservoir host of Ebola viruses has not yet been identified, the manner in which the virus first appears in a human at the start of an outbreak is unknown. However, researchers believe that the first patient becomes infected through contact with an infected animal. When an infection does occur in humans, the virus can spread in several ways to others. Ebola is spread through direct contact, like through broken skin or mucous membranes, in, for example, the eyes, nose, or mouth. This would include with blood or bloody fluids, included but not limited to urine, saliva, sweat, feces, vomit, breast milk, and semen of a person who is sick with Ebola. Objects like needles and syringes have been contaminated with the virus. Animals have been known to be infected. Ebola is not spread through the air or by water or in general by food. However, in Africa, Ebola may be spread as a result of handling bushmeat, wild animals hunted for food, and contact with infected bats. There is no evidence that mosquitoes or other insects can transmit the Ebola virus. Only mammals, for example humans, bats, monkeys, and apes, have shown the ability to become infected with and spread the Ebola virus. Healthcare providers caring for Ebola patients and the family and friends in close contact with Ebola patients are at the highest risk of getting sick because they may come in contact with infected blood or bloody fluids of sick patients. During outbreaks of Ebola, this disease can spread quickly within healthcare settings, such as a clinic or a hospital. Exposure to Ebola can occur in healthcare settings where a hospital staff are not wearing appropriate protective equipment. We'll get into that in a minute, including masks, gowns, gloves, and eye protection. Dedicated medical equipment, preferable disposable when possible, should be used by healthcare personnel providing patient care. Proper cleaning and disposal of instruments, such as needles and syringes, is also important. If instruments are not disposable, they must be sterilized before being used again. Without adequate sterilization of the instruments, virus transmissions can continue to amplify an outbreak. Once someone recovers from Ebola, they can no longer spread the virus. However, Ebola virus has been found in semen for up to 3 months. Abstinence from sex, including oral sex, is recommended for at least 3 months. If abstinence is not possible, condoms may help to prevent the spread of disease. So this is the information that is provided to the United States and I guess the world from the CDC website directly. This is what it says specifically about the information. So as of right now, the world is being told by America that it cannot be spread through the air. That being said, it also talked about the people who are at highest risk would be healthcare professionals. And right now in Texas, there are strikes going on at hospitals by healthcare providers, not health insurance companies, but the actual physical people who do the actual medical care, nurses, doctors, things of that nature, who are striking because they're not being provided with the appropriate materials to handle the high-risk situation that they are admittedly in. And that seems to be a hot-button issue of today.
Now, I guess, well, I mean, that case, we're pretty certain that this is the way that this disease spreads.
Yeah.
But there is some uncertainty. I mean,
yeah, and when I say
there is a bunch of uncertainty, and why is it that we don't, yeah, I know it's not the most diplomatic thing to do, maybe, but shut the flights down, at least temporarily.
I don't know if you saw my tweet from last night, but I snapped and I remembered. I said, wait a minute. On September 11th, George W. Bush demanded all air traffic control in the United States to be grounded, and we were grounded for like a week or two. Mm-hmm. Why can't we do that now for the 21 days, 3 weeks?
And we're not talking about grounding all air traffic, just in and out of that country, or those countries that are, that we know that the disease is prevalent in.
I'm willing to even say go forward and say, all U.S. travel, all U.S. air travel, just 21 days. If everybody, I know it's difficult. It'll jack up business. I know. But at the same time, when you've got a disease that's like this, that is, there was a time when AIDS did the exact same thing. Only 1 or 2 people had it, and then bang. So, honestly, I got to be real honest here. I'm of the mindset that it's going to get a lot worse before it goes away. It may never go away. That's me personally, just from past experiences with how our country has handled, virus outbreaks in the United States. We don't have a very good track record of it.
Well, yeah. But then,
the numbers
are. You have a pretty good track record of finding cures for diseases.
Absolutely. And I don't know. We can't say definitively yet, but do we have a cure for Ebola? This nurse in Texas has now been changed from stable condition to good condition. So she's obviously coming through this disease that we were told 20 years ago would kill you on instant, or just about instant. So, I definitely advocate for our medicine is good. Our medicine is definitely good. You can't argue with people who allegedly have Ebola, and come on, you like that little rub there, and seem to come out okay. So, with that said, the thing that I feel like we do poorly is contain it. H1N1, flu virus. The rhinovirus, everything that we have, you can't stop it. Once it rolls, it rolls. And sure, a lot of that has to do with the fact that we as people just are terrible. We don't wash our hands enough. We don't clean ourselves up. We don't.
Well, I think there are just so many variables.
Yeah.
Talk about shutting down stopping air traffic for 21 days. Well, that right there opens up all kinds of different cans of worms.
People just drive.
Well, and you get people that start losing their mind when things aren't normal. You know what I'm saying? So, anywho, what else we got in the news? I got an interesting little tidbit.
Lay it on us.
There is a Dutch motorcycle gang, or a couple members of a Dutch motorcycle gang, that have dropped everything and decided to join the fight against ISIS with the Kurds.
Really?
Yeah.
That's
so I'm
totally
cool. I'm going to quote from the WashingtonPost.com. It says that at least 3 members of a Dutch biker gang, have joined up with the Kurdish fighters in Iraq, according to Agence France Presse. The trio belong to a group known as No Surrender, a gang with chapters across the country. Their leader confirmed that 3 members had traveled recently to join the front lines of the Peshmerga battle against the Islamic State. A Kurdish Dutch Twitter account posted a picture of one of the supposed Dutch bikers sporting a Kurdish keffiyeh and clutching an automatic rifle alongside a Kurdish fighter in what appears to be a bunker. So it's unclear what motivated these members of the biker gang, other than sympathy for the Kurds, whose various militias in Iraq and Syria have been locked in battle with Islamic States for months now.
And when the Kurds and the Dutch go out for dinner, the Dutch just take care of their own bill.
Because they're going Dutch. I've actually heard of, people in this country talking about doing that, about flying over there and joining the fight.
I was going to say, because I already go Dutch when I go out with people for lunch, so that's... You meant fighting.
I meant fighting. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, brother.
We'll be right back right after this.
David Vox Mullen here to tell you all about what's new this fall on the DVM Podcast Empire. The new TV season is here, and we've got a great lineup for you. New shows like Gotham, The Flash, Forever, iZombie, Better Call Saul, Constantine, The Messengers, and Wayward Pines. We've also got new DVMPE original shows like Movie Mojo Monthly, Loot the Room, TV Resurrection, The Comic Book Podcast, Fangirl Zone, Push the Button, and The Windy City Rejects. And yes, all of your favorites are coming back as well, like the Podcast of Interest, Aerocast, American Horrorcast, the New Who Podcast, Game of Thrones, Grimm, Once Upon a Time, The Walking Dead, and so much more. Of course, absolutely none of this would be possible without the support of our listeners just like you. So please consider your continuation of support by telling all of your friends about us, shopping online through our Amazon portals, or simply by donating directly at DVMPE.com. The DVM Podcast Empire. We don't just watch TV, we live it.
And we're back, and we have a very special guest with us today on Push the Button Podcast. He is a public speaker, he's an avid gamer, an internet personality, and he was the president of the atheist community of Austin until May of 2013. He hosts the Austin-based webcast and cable access television show The Atheist Experience, and formerly hosted the live internet radio show Nonprofits Radio. He is also the founder and contributor of the Counter-Apologetics Encyclopedia, Iron Chariots, and its subsidiary sites. He is regularly engaged in formal debates and travels the United States speaking to local secular organizations and university groups as part of the Secular Student Alliance's Speakers Bureau. Alongside fellow activists Seth Andrews and Aaron Ra, he is planning to travel to Australia in 2015 with their Unholy Trinity Tour. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Matt Dillahunty. Matt, thanks so much for coming with us today.
Oh, thanks for having me. This is great.
Avid gamer. We want to know right away. Avid gamer.
Yeah, that's the most important. Out of all those things that you just listed, Dave, avid gamer was the thing that popped up.
That's the one thing that pops out. Like, wait.
Yeah, it's actually been kind of interesting. I don't know. You guys are probably familiar with Twitch TV, people streaming games now. Well, I used to be an incredibly avid gamer. Like, I ran the #1 Counter-Strike team in the United States along with my roommate for a number of years.
Oh, my gosh. I played Counter-Strike for way too many more years than I should have.
Yeah. And then, I moved on to MMOs, and I've been gaming for as long as games were around. I took a little bit of a break while I was focused on running the ACA and stuff. But in the past, 9 months or so, I've been playing Path of Exile, and I'll stream it on Twitch. And people will come in, and I'll end up having to stand still, like in the middle of town, while I give a 10-minute lecture on some philosophical issue. And then I get to go back and play some more.
That's fantastic. Are you a Warcraft guy?
I did World of Warcraft for quite a while. I stopped before the pandas. I didn't really have an objection to it. I just got busy at that point. It didn't make sense to continue playing at that moment.
At one point, my wife actually sat me down, and she brought out a pad of paper, and she had logged. she had logged all the time that I had spent.
Oh man,
this is the problem. You need to stop this. So I quit.
I have way more hours in games than anybody should really have, considering the other things that I do.
Well, let's talk about some of the other things. I mean, obviously, first of all, I just want to say it's a great honor to have you on here. I know that you are well respected in the community, and I feel bad for Ken because the last handful of podcasts we've had have had a bunch of my friends who were, people of faith and whatnot, and I felt like Ken was feeling like the deck was stacked against him.
Well, actually, part of that was my doing. I was the one that brought on Father Nell.
Yeah, you did. That's right.
And I've said before that most of the time I appreciate. I'm like right now I'm working on a project at Patreon that's Atheist Debates, and it's about teaching atheists how to argue better. But quite frankly, I'd rather spend most of my time talking to believers because I spent 25 years as a fundamentalist Christian, was going to be a minister, and I think they're going to benefit more from what I have to say quite often than atheists do. So, while I love Ken, I'd rather be on a show full of theists.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I've definitely been. I've had the pleasure. Ken showed me some of your stuff on YouTube, and I really enjoyed, hearing your conversations with people. And very, very eloquent. I like the way that you present yourself, and it does help. Okay, now I'm just gushing, so that's ridiculous. So.
Hey, I was supposed to be the one marking out.
I know. I like people who think freely, and that's kind of the key. I think that's what brought Ken and I together, is that we both recognize that in each other. So, and it's a refreshing thing, as I'm sure you can imagine, with all the people that you come across. As a person who does have a belief structure, whether it is, founded on BS or not, I find that a lot of people of faith get frightened of the uncertainty or frightened of the unknown, and so they become very confrontational to a fault, where it becomes like you can't even you can't even help somebody at that point because they're just like, well, this is what I've learned and this is what I know and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And I've gotten a lot further in my adult life as I stop and go, maybe I just don't know everything, And that's been a big thing for me. And I think when I met Ken, it was the perfect timing because he was fed up with dealing with people like that. And I said, please let me be a breath of fresh air to be like, hey, maybe we don't know what's going on. Let's explore. And that's really what this whole podcast project has been, is just not clearly having answers one way or the other, but just exploring and just kind of sitting in that uncertainty. And I think it's been a lot of fun for me personally. It's been a big journey. I don't know what Ken thinks of it, but
it's pretty good.
But today, Ken wanted to bring you on. We wanted to talk about, today's episode specifically is going to be about morality. And the reason why we're bringing up morality, I know that you've had conversations about that subject before, but this is more of our, we did an episode earlier on with the separation of church and state, where we talked about the Ten Commandments and how a lot of Americans try to use the Ten Commandments as a basis for our morality or how we should behave. And we kind of got to a point, we absolutely came to a point where really, aside from thou shalt not kill, there really wasn't anything that applied if you implement the separation of church and state, meaning there's really no point for the other 9 commandments.
Thou shalt not steal was also.
Oh yeah, that was the other one. Don't take my stuff.
2 out of 10 ain't bad.
But that being said, where Ken and I came to in our journey here is if we take those away then and say, okay, so the 10 Commandments are off the table, then who and how and what determines what our morality should be? And I think that is something that we would like to explore. Like, where does it come from? Is it, I'm of the mindset that, obviously if we take the 10 Commandments out of the picture, then it becomes what you learn at birth, pain hurts, so I don't want that to happen again. More of a Pavlovian type reaction to life and your environment. That's kind of where I'm at with morality, but I'd like to get everybody's opinion.
Well, it's not just this idea that you learned that pain is bad. So first of all, the 10 Commandments actually, even now that you've narrowed it down to the 2 commandments, it's actually even worse than that, because thou shalt not kill is not very clear or specific. It may not even be an issue of morality. There's a lot of confusion between morality and the law. We don't legislate merely on the basis of whether we consider something moral or not. There are plenty of things that we would consider to be immoral that aren't actually against the law, and there are laws that have little or nothing to do with morality, until you maybe extend it out further, like, the speed limit. It's not necessarily a moral imperative that you go the speed limit, although the risks then have consequences.
I clearly drive immorally.
Yeah, and so for me, and I gave a lecture for years, and I redid it here in Reno on the superiority of secular morality, and I was contrasting secular moral systems with religious moral systems. And the conclusion is that there's no such thing as a religious moral system. Because there's no system there. There's no mechanism to help you make decisions. If your holy book says, X is good or X is bad, well, then you're done. It doesn't tell you, for example, there's no pronouncements about stem cell research. All of that is up to somebody's opinion and impressions and interpretation, just like anything else. And moreover, the things that it's explicit about also seem to be up for grabs. Like, for example, the Bible endorses slavery, and yet we all consider that to be immoral. So even the things that it makes pronouncements about are clearly up for grabs. And so for me, morality is, if it's going to mean anything, I'm in agreement with Sam Harris that we have to be talking about well-being. And while it's not particularly well-defined, I get frustrated when people say, well, why should we care about well-being? And I think that it's kind of obvious. Nobody asks, why do we care about health? So we're physical beings in a physical universe, and that universe dictates that our actions are going to have consequences. Those consequences are going to affect us in certain ways, and some of those are going to be positive and some are going to be negative. And this is true for both, physical health and societal health and mental health, and all of this that gets put into a package of well-being. I think we could all agree, I would hope that we could all agree that we care about well-being. That's what I mean by morality. And so when somebody says, where do you get your morality from? It is from the facts about reality that dictate the consequences of my actions. And, until I live in a reality where, sticking a knife in someone and gutting them makes them warm and fuzzy in a good way and improves their life, then I think it's kind of obvious to say that this is contrary to our well-being and it's okay to label it as immoral.
So you're saying that it's not so much morality as it is an essence of right and wrong per individual, or?
Well, no, because no individual's opinion changes the facts.
Right.
And I'm going to keep picking on Ken. If Ken takes a sledgehammer and bashes my skull in, somebody could have the opinion that was actually good for me, but they would be wrong.
Okay. Yeah.
This is just a truth about reality, that my well-being has clearly been diminished. Not that he would ever actually, do that.
I would hope not. That'd be
never.
terrible.
I would never want to do that. But there are some societies where, obviously, look at the various parts of the Middle East right now. There are societies that think that it's a good thing to cut somebody's head off.
Yeah, and female genital mutilation and all of these other issues where they consider to be moral imperatives or pronouncements from their religions about the right way to do things. And the key thing to recognize there is that because in my view I appeal to the facts about reality, that people's opinions can then be wrong. And we already kind of intuitively recognize this. I mean, nobody bothers to invite KKK members to discussions about human rights because they have already expressed views that are so clearly wrong, that are so clearly counterproductive that they've removed themselves from the conversation.
Next week on Push the Button, KKK members discussing human rights. No, no, I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, to build a moral system, the only thing you need is a couple of, and they can be completely arbitrary, foundational principles. Now, I think we've pretty much determined some good starting points, like life is generally preferable to death. I mean, that seems pretty straightforward, and I say generally because there's going to be exceptions. When we talk about people's right to die, for example, there are times where your quality of life and the rest of your life is going to be so miserable that it could be the case that death is preferable. But generally speaking, life is preferable to death. And the people who don't agree with this tend to remove themselves from the conversation.
Sure.
If you think death is preferable to life, well, I'm not going to get a chance to talk to you because you're dead.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it depends on how much action you take to get there.
Well, then you get to whether or not they actually believe that.
Yeah, sure, exactly. So what does that look like? What is? I mean, I've heard of is it the Bill of Human Rights or something like that? I've heard was written. What was it? Oh gosh, I can't remember where it was from. What was it?
Are you talking FDR's?
That might be it. It was basically just basic human rights for all over the world.
It was like the second Bill of Rights that was written by FDR.
That might have been it.
There's a number of different attempts to actually do this. When you ask, what is it like, or what does it look like? I think it looks exactly like what we have, because I'm convinced that the moral views that we have, so let me make a quick distinction. Moral relativism in philosophy circles is this idea that something is moral merely because a society says so, and that it's immoral merely because a society says so. And that's a position I absolutely reject.
I was going to say, that sounds scary to me.
Yeah, this is what I meant when I said that people can be wrong about it. So I'm not advocating moral relativism. I am advocating for situational morality, in that each situation needs to be considered on its own merits. So breaking a window and taking a loaf of bread from the store, may be more immoral. It's always going to be illegal. But after Katrina, when people needed to do it to survive, all of a sudden the morality of the situation changes a little bit. And you have to view them each independently, but you're not operating in a vacuum, because you can compare, what the consequences are likely to be for some things.
So there is no, in your opinion, there is no necessarily objective morality, more like subjective morality, like...
No, I think it's objective. I think that there are objective truths, facts about the universe. But you're always going to have subjective assessments. But like, for example, the rules of chess. If you agree on what the rules are, now you can evaluate whether or not a move is legal, and you can also evaluate whether or not a move is in your best interest, whether or not you're more likely to win the game or avoid losing the game, or if you're going to actually lose from it. And these aren't subjective assessments. They are objective with respect to a standard. And that's why I begin with this standard of well-being, which even though it's not well defined, one of the goals we have is getting better at defining it. The same as we would for, physical health. Sam Harris points out that when you take and you look at physical health, what does it mean to say that someone is healthy? Well, that framework has changed over time as we've gained understanding and as we change.
Sure. How fast should a healthy person be able to run? I've heard him talk about that. Is flexibility preferable to strength, or
Well, let's just go for the obvious here. I don't know all of Ken's health issues, but I'm a lazy, fat, diabetic slob. And I could say all day long that I'm healthier than he is, and I would be objectively wrong, because we know enough about health to know that, one of us is more physically fit, one of us is more generally healthy, along those lines. That doesn't mean that we're talking about an absolute, that under every criteria, like I might have better eyesight than Ken, I might have better hearing than Dave. Those are individual things. And so it's really difficult to assess this entire package, but that doesn't mean the absence of a clear right answer doesn't mean that we know nothing. And so this is one of the common objections people launch to secular moral systems is, well, now it's all up to just whatever you think. And no, it's really not, because I can be wrong. And the appeal is always to the facts about reality.
Well, the direction I feel you taking me here is it really kind of depends on the environment. If there is a global catastrophe, The Walking Dead becomes a reality, and now we're living in a post, zombie apocalypse type thing, and so. Yes, breaking into a storefront that's been left empty to steal a loaf of bread, is it really immoral at that point? And
it may be the most moral thing you can do.
Exactly. So what I'm getting from you, and tell me if I'm off, is that it really depends greatly on the society, and it does depend greatly on the circumstances that your environment is.
Yeah, the circumstance, not so much the society, because that I think is a little too close to. Our group thinks this is correct, so now all of a sudden slavery is all right again. But it's definitely situational. And the thing is, for any given situation, pick one scenario where you can take an action. There's a finite set of actions that you can possibly take. And we know that some of them are going to be better than others, and some of them are going to be worse. And so we can take all of the actions that you could take and put them on a graduated scale. And that means that there must be some set of one or more actions, because you could take several actions that produce identical results. But there must be some set of one or more actions for that specific situation that represent the moral pinnacle, the best things that you can do. Now, we may not know what those are, but all we need to be able to do is compare the consequences of different possible actions to determine kind of like what's better. And then that gives us the opportunity to keep getting better at getting better as well.
Right. Well, I mean, you mentioned earlier. And you mentioned earlier how you said that the Bible endorses slavery, and we, as a people, even in America, endorsed slavery for a long time. Mm-hmm. And I would say that for the most part, we've clearly gotten away from that, and we credit, I would assume, education to that.
Yeah, it's amazing.
But like Ken mentioned earlier too, like in the Middle East, there are people who are behaving in a way that they don't feel is immoral. And so is that part of the society thing that you're talking about, where a certain society says it's acceptable to beat your wife and things like that? Things that maybe we as white Anglo-Saxon, European descendants have stepped away from.
Well, And the thing is that those people are just as convinced that it's right as we are convinced that it's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and this is the big kind of problem or sticking point that a lot of people get to, which is, I say this is right, you say it's wrong. How do we resolve this?
Yeah.
And if you have religions as the foundation, then the way religions go about making these changes is through conversion and conquest. Whereas if you have a secular moral system, you are appealing to reason and the facts about reality. And so when a society says that, it's perfectly acceptable to, throw acid in the face of your daughter for shaming your family by daring to drive a car and be out in public without a man, there are foundational ideas that have led them to those conclusions, and you have to drill down and actually address those foundational ideas and show the individuals why this is wrong. At some point, they have a conflict. Now, it may be the case that the conflict is at the very foundation, where instead of beginning with reasonable propositions like life is generally preferable to death, they have replaced that with I must do, or it is morally correct for me to do whatever it is I think God wants me to do.
Sure.
And if that's the foundation, that's very difficult to address. But I don't think it's remotely impossible, because you can get people to realize that their interpretation of what God wants them to do could be wrong.
Sure.
It is possible that they are, in fact, wrong about the existence of God. And moreover, there's no reason to think that the mere existence of a God necessarily means that God is correct about what is morally right, especially when the pronouncements that we've gotten on behalf of the various gods that have been proposed, we now disagree with, by and large, on something.
Do we think that has a lot to do with just mankind and our individual selves?
I do. I think so we're intellectually lazy, and
sure.
We live our lives by inference and induction. So today is pretty much the same as yesterday, and that's really good. It works in our benefit. It allows me to say, I'm in a situation that feels roughly familiar because I've dealt with this before, and so now I know the right answer. And we're really good at it, and it's really works in our best interest most of the time. But when it goes wrong, it goes horribly wrong, and it creates this reinforcement of, I did this before and it worked out. Because we're really bad at seeing the consequences of our actions clearly. We see what most immediately affects us. So we've got like these blinders on, and we're looking through a little slit, and we can only see a little bit forward and a little bit backward in time, and we can only see the effects on us and maybe the immediate people around us. We're really bad at seeing the long-term effects on a large population. And so there's a number of questions that, I use to try to figure out, am I taking a moral action? And the most common one is, what would the world be like if everybody did what I do?
Right. Well, speaking from my own experience, I know that I can't agree more. I mean, that I am completely intellectually lazy. And, I'd like to hope that I'm a little more far advanced than some of the people I deal with on a daily basis. But at the same time, I know that there's plenty of information out there that I just haven't bothered to explore. That being said,
you're absolutely right.
And it definitely gets that way. I know you'll crack open 20 books at one time and read a chapter from each one. I mean, I mean, my wife always makes fun of me. In fact, you mentioned that on a different show that my wife and I listened to together, and she said, "Oh, it sounds just like you," because I have like 17 books that I haven't finished, but they're all like half read.
Yeah.
I mean, that's totally the case, and I think people like myself are probably, like I said, even further along than most of everyone else when it comes to, get up, do your job, come home, watch American Idol, drink a Coke, and eat a Big Mac. It's easy to fall into that. And so that's another reason why Ken and I really wanted to do this show, is to kind of say, wait a minute. There's more out there that is literally just there for the taking if we take a minute and just explore. So as far as the fundamental issue, and you're saying there's still like a root-seated thing. Do you think religion is it? Do you think religion is the deep-rooted seat for all of these things that we as, Central American people figure is immoral, that they think is moral?
Well, I think that can be. I think quite often religions prey on, and I don't mean that in an intentional sense, like somebody manufactured a religion. These ideas that religions are fictions invented specifically to control people, that's something I find rather absurd. It's much more reasonable to recognize that they're just effective at that. And so we have fears. We have fears of dying. We have fears of being alone. We have an internal sense of fairness, which we've observed in other primates. There's this brilliant study where they have two monkeys in cages side by side, and they're both being given this very simple task of, hand me this item. And one of the monkeys is being paid with, for a good job, with, I forget what it was. Maybe
I think it was grapes.
One of them was getting like a bit of lettuce or a nut or something like that. And he's fine doing the job and getting that reward because that reward's good enough. And then he sees that the other monkey is being handed grapes as a reward. And as soon as he sees that, his internal sense of fairness goes nuts. And now he starts, he stops doing the task and starts, throwing the rock back at the researcher, like, pay me some damn grapes.
So what do we think that is? I mean, what is that? This internal sense of fairness, as you call it. Like, let's explore that.
I think it's just, I don't think it's anything special or unique or magical. It's this idea that we value our own lives and we want our lives to be good, and we see what other people do. You talk about the Ten Commandments, and how they're not the foundation of U.S. law. I mean, the final one about coveting. I mean, you get rid of that, and you get rid of the United States of America and capitalism and everything else, because coveting is what drives us. And so we're looking at those primates, and what we're seeing is, hey, why am I not getting what he's getting if I'm doing the same work? Now, I don't know how strongly or deeply they think about these things, but I think it shows that this is something intuitive about us, that we recognize when something is wrong, even if we can't fully comprehend why it's wrong.
Let alone articulate it.
Yeah. And I think you articulated pretty well, throwing crap back at the
That's true.
If this objective morality really existed, why would it not be ingrained as it is with, a dog? A dog knows automatically when it gives birth to some puppies how to take care of those puppies.
Mm-hmm.
And to eat the placenta, and to do all sorts of other things. There are certain things that my dog does that I've never had to train it. And
science has forever labeled that as instinct.
Right, but if there's objective morality, then why isn't that just instinct? Why would we not just know not to harm another human being?
Well, it may be the case that we do. I think it may be a little bit problematic to assume that because something is true and in our best interest, that it would automatically be ingrained in us. Because I think that this is a little more complicated than that. What we're seeing is our brains take a look at reality and form an internal model of reality. Mm-hmm. And then we have certain desires. Now, some of these are going to be instinctive. The desire to continue living is generally something that, is instinctive. It's one of the reasons why I started with life is generally preferable to death. But the complex stuff, if I take this action, it's going to have these consequences. Being able to, humans aren't necessarily unique and special, but we do appear to have the strongest capability for self-reflection. And so I can say, if I take this action, it's going to have this immediate benefit to me. And if I don't also consider the consequences in a broader sense, then I can get focused so strongly on this benefit to me that it may lead me to do something that's ultimately not in my best interest. If I'm in an argument with somebody and it's really annoying and frustrating and I just can't take it anymore, well, I could kill them and now the argument's over. I have immediately benefited myself, but the long-term benefits are harder to see. And as far as I can tell, we are perhaps the best species that we know of that can do this, but that doesn't mean we're particularly good at it. And there's no reason to think, or I don't see any reason to think that it should automatically be ingrained, because we know we're prone to thinking mistakes. And I think that if, this isn't just about let me follow my gut, it's about let me train my gut. That's the advantage of a secular moral system, is that it allows you to look at situations and come up with better ways to assess the future situations that you're likely to come into, so that you have to think less about them, or you don't have to think quite as much about them as you would without that. If that,
it's interesting. Ken and I, on many occasions, we get all over the place, which we love. We get politics, we talk about science, we talk about philosophy. A few episodes back, we were getting into I think a listener sent in a question about, what was our opinion on whether or not animals have souls or something like that. And we started getting into the concept of what is consciousness, what is awareness, what is, things of that nature. And I brought up the mirror test. I don't know if you're familiar with that or not, but the mirror test is where they, some animals are faced themselves with a mirror, and certain animals don't seem to give any markers that they recognize themselves, whereas other animals do. And obviously we are an animal that looks at ourselves in the mirror and can recognize that we are individually something. And we were trying to dig into that, and obviously we don't have an answer, but I was just curious on what your thoughts are on that sort of a thing. Like, we as an entity, as a living physical entity on this planet, what is it that, we look at ourselves, we are aware of ourselves, like you said, we're the best at it, but not necessarily good at it.
Yeah, and I'm not necessarily sure that, so for example, and I haven't looked at the studies. Yes, we recognize ourselves in a mirror, but the bigger question for me is, how do we do that? And does it happen automatically? Do I immediately, the very first time I ever saw my reflection, did I immediately recognize it was me? I doubt it.
Yeah, I doubt it too.
I think what happened is that we have this capacity to investigate, and when I look at myself in the mirror, I need to then say, okay, is that somebody else, and oh wait, it's doing exactly what I'm doing. And we put together this basically detective story that leads us to the conclusion that, oh yeah, we're looking at ourselves, and we continue to pile more and more evidence on top of this. So to me, it seems like a bit of a learned behavior. This idea of whether or not that counts as part of a soul or whatever. I think the idea of a soul and an afterlife is the most obviously dead concept in all of the pronouncements about religion. We don't know everything about the brain by a long shot, but we know enough to know that this concept makes no sense.
Sure. And I wasn't so interested in the whole soul concept or the afterlife concept, but more of just consciousness and, awareness. And I mean, I'm often floored and amazed by, something as small as ants building an ant tunnel and mankind building, the city of Chicago and just streets and everything. To me, it's an amazing thing. And it's like, where did we come from this cavemanic type state to let's build up this amazing world around us? And to me, it's like, what is it about us that dogs can't do that monkeys can't? Sure, some animals do similar type things, but to this grand scale that we have this whole set of rules and philosophies and this spirit of exploration that we have. Like, what do we think that is?
Opposable thumbs, bro.
Is that what it is? It's all just been the thumbs.
Yep.
Yeah. Who knows how to do stuff? This guy. It's all about the yeah, one of the things is that, I had this conversation in Reno with somebody after my talk about morality, about this idea that, we're somehow special. And that's one of the reasons why I brought up, the sense of fairness that we've observed in primates, and that other creatures, other animals, have moral systems. They just aren't as developed as ours are. Mm-hmm. And so it'd be really nice to say, hey, we're special. And the truth is that we're not, that this is a kind of a bit of arrogance on our part of picking the things that we happen to be good at and saying this, elevates us above others. You could pick a different trait, like I'm not going to be able to run as fast as a cheetah. And you could say, well, okay, but that's just a physical running thing. That's nothing at all like consciousness. Consciousness is an amazing thing, and it is. But I think it's amazing to us because we have it. And I think it's kind of a bit of a mistake to focus on it as if it means that there's something magical or special about us and that we need to understand that puts us above everything else. I make no apologies for being speciesist. I'm going to show preference to my fellow humans over dogs and fish and whatever you pick. But that doesn't mean that I'm dispassionate about any of the others.
Sure.
But I also don't think that, consciousness, Dan Dennett has a great book called Consciousness Explained. And the curious thing about it is that some of the initial criticisms from other philosophers were that the book should have been named Consciousness Explained Away. Because Dennett is arguing for consciousness as this, that our views about it are essentially wrong. That we don't have this Cartesian theater, that we're not like a pilot in a box steering things, and that the fact that we think about it in this way is preventing us from recognizing it for what it is, which is an emergent property. It's just what the mind is, what the brain does.
Mm-hmm. So you're just saying that it's just something that the brain has learned to develop, evolved over the years.
Yeah, it's in our best interest. It shows we can watch how the brain does things and see very clearly that this has helped us. And so if you look at it from a purely evolutionary model, obviously there's going to be a selection towards those creatures that have this ability to model the world in a way where they can consider the consequences of their actions, because that's what's going to allow them to live longer and better.
So when it comes back to morality, we are using what, an incorrect system, or is it a...
Well, some of us are.
Yeah, sure. Well, when it comes to, you made a good point earlier about how, people in other societies do things that they believe 100% that they're right on, whereas we look at that and go, oh, that's horrible, that's terrible, that's wrong. We do it in our own country with, some people think that one thing is an issue and other people think that it's not an issue at all, and then there's another group that says that's a terrible thing. And
well, let's pick on the Bible, since this is a largely Christian country. Like, there are 613 laws in the Old Testament, something like over 2,000 in the entire Bible, but somehow most Christians, have whittled that down to 10 or 11. How do we do that?
I don't know. I know I fail those 10 daily, so I don't know how that works. But I would say, yes, I'm sure that there are Christians out there who clearly, obviously there are. There's people out there who take the time to study that, and you've got your theologians and people who are really into that. But then there's people who just kind of grew up hearing about it and not really applying it to anything and just having it being told to them, and they have no basis of understanding where that's coming from other than my parents told me about it and their parents told them about it. And to me, I find that frustrating too, just as much as I'm sure you do. But
I'm an atheist because I took my Christianity seriously. 1 Peter 3:15, it was an instruction that be prepared at all times to give a reason for the faith that's within you. That's the first half of the verse.
I fail that one on this show all the time.
Yeah, when I do the TV show, what I'm really getting to when I'm talking with whether it's Christians or Muslims or Hindus or whoever is tell me what you believe and why. And I care about the what, because that's the topic to consider. But the why is the more important thing, because if it turns out that your why is only applicable to you, then we're stuck.
Right.
I've had this divine revelation. Okay, well I can't disprove that.
You can't share that either.
As Hume pointed out, revelation is necessarily first person to everybody else's hearsay. And so your personal revelation does me no good.
Right.
But if you're, the why question is, why should I believe what you believe?
And Ken and I have gotten into that.
Fails.
Yeah, and Ken and I have gotten into that many times, and I think where we've come to is that man has this unexplainable need first of all, we have this unexplainable need to want the answer. Mm-hmm. We do. I don't care what side of the aisle you're on, politically, spiritually, educationally. I think we all want an answer. And I think that for some groups of people, the God story, however many there may be, seem to satisfy a part of that need that we have to get an answer, right or wrong. I give you that. But
it's wrong.
I think that there is. I think it still boils back down to something even more basic, which is maybe a fear of being alone, a fear of, like you said, not being special.
There's an intrinsic discomfort with not knowing, because we understand that knowing is in our best interest. I did a series of debates at a Church of Christ in San Antonio, 3 nights in a row. I mean, this was the most intense weekend of my entire career.
I saw the thing that you talked about that on. It was hilarious and sad at the same time. I'm sorry.
Yeah. It turned out. I mean, I love the fact that I did it. It's given me a lot of things to think about and a lot of things to talk about. I've heard from people who were in the church who emailed me afterwards, which I think is great that they're willing to, reach out from behind their very tight-knit group to seek opinions outside. But the main preacher was really frustrated with this idea of not knowing, and asked me, "Are you comfortable going to your deathbed not knowing the answer to these questions?" And I said, "No. That's why we go out and we look for the answers. What I'm not comfortable with is accepting non-answers." And God, no matter which God you're offering up, that has no explanatory power. It is a panacea that can be used. It's magic. And so when you come across something that you don't understand, if you offer God as the explanation, you haven't explained anything. You've solved a mystery by appealing to a bigger mystery. And if your God can serve as an answer for everything, then it's an explanation for nothing. And so until there's, some time where it's like, well, why is there something rather than nothing? Because God created it. Well, that didn't tell me anything about the why.
Well, and I think that boils definitely down to it's good enough for some, like to stop. Like Ken and I always point out, why stop?
Exactly. When I did a talk in California, and I said, look, here's the problem. When we come up against this discomfort of not knowing, are we really looking for an explanation, or are we looking to ease the discomfort of not knowing? And I think what many people do is say, oh, this makes me uncomfortable to not know this, so I'm willing to accept this answer uncritically because it eases this discomfort, even if it doesn't actually do anything, edifying to help our understanding of reality.
I really like that. That's very interesting.
I saw an interview. It was on Bill O'Reilly. Bill O'Reilly was interviewing, I think, David Silverman.
Yeah.
Where Bill's assertion was that, well, you don't have the answers to anything. How did the tides go in, the tides go out? How did that happen? And, what he's saying is that his explanation somehow magically is the correct, the correct interpretation.
It's doubly funny because we actually do have an explanation for the time.
Right. I know that I piss a lot of my fellow Christians off, and I get a lot of shit from the church because I've had no problem ever asking questions and been more than ready to admit that I could be way off base and I want to know more. And I've definitely come across the fear, and I label it as fear. It's just they don't understand, they don't know, they're afraid that maybe what they're thinking is wrong, and they don't want to even go down that road. So I get ridiculed. So that's annoying to me. But that's another reason why Ken and I do this. But this is an opportunity for me to just keep asking people who have been thinking about it probably a lot longer than I have. So you mentioned it's magic, and I love that you used that analogy. And Ken even said the same thing when he was talking about O'Reilly. We called a lot of stuff magic for years until we learned what it really was. You know what I mean?
Yeah, in the entire history of the world, whenever we've discovered the correct answer to something, it's never been magic and it's never been God's.
It's always been some sort of other system explanation.
Which doesn't mean that there's not magic and that there's not God's. It just means we've never confirmed it. And every time we proposed it as an answer, and discovered the truth, we've discovered that we were wrong. And that's a trend that I think, we ignore to our peril.
Yeah. Well, and it's a refreshing thing to hear somebody say, it doesn't mean it's not the answer, it doesn't mean that it's not a God, but that's not an explanation for either, is what I'm thinking you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. So So when we talk about things that are magical or miraculous. I know that you talked about in some of the other stuff about miracles and things like that, and how some people say that they don't believe miracles still exist anymore and things like that. And
at Church of Christ.
Yeah, and then obviously there are some who still do believe in miracles, and they make lots and lots of money convincing people, and I'm sure you can tell where I'm going with that. But it does appear very magical, and so, if we use that same level of approaching it that we've used for years on how to debunk magic, I mean, I think to a degree we as people, you go to a magic show. I'll use Penn and Teller because I know that they're respected in the atheist community. I've been to Penn and Teller shows. They're great guys. I've met them both. And I can't help but sit in their show and their performance when they do these amazing, miraculous things and go, how the hell did they do that?
Yeah.
And in some cases, they'll show you, and I love that. Yeah, I love that because it's, until you're shown the moment, everything in your fibers are like, this is what happened. I know what happened because I'm using my eyes and my ears and my senses to just make my own idiotic 30-something-year-old opinion of what it is. And then to have them, pull back the curtain and say, actually, this is what we did, this is how it happened, and this is what it was. I would say that it for lack of better terminology, it takes the magic away.
It's actually worse than you think. So
yeah.
I've been a magician my entire life. I did an hour-long mentalism show at a PastaCon. It's harder to get me to not do magic than to do it.
Sure.
And so when I was in the Navy, I was still a Christian, and I'd been doing magic, and I would do simple card tricks for people. And there were some who would just lose their shit and freak out and be like, oh, yeah. And there were some who would say, how do you handle it? You've got these, demonic powers and everything else. And it frustrated me and it embarrassed me. As a Christian, I was like, well, no, I don't want you to think that I'm doing this through demonic powers. So I would then show them how I did what I did because I didn't want them freaking out. And on multiple occasions, they would look at me and say, that's not what you did. So they've already, not only that, I would hear them talk about, they go tell their friend what trick I did. And what they described was better, not only better than what I did, it's better than anything I could have. They have built up this story in their head.
Okay, but now, see, that's so interesting to me. So you're a magician. Mm-hmm. And I have a handful of friends who are magicians, and I love being a happy receiver of magic. I love watching it. I love, exactly. For those of you who can't see, he just took his finger off in the camera. I love that wonder. I had a good buddy of mine. His name is Jonathan Levitt. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He is a magician. He's been on television and does a lot of hosting and stuff. And he was on a show with me a while back where we discussed magic and we got into what magic is, and we got into the essence of people ultimately want to be floored. They want to be, they want to believe something more than what is reality, what they think the existence of day-to-day life is. And I wonder if that's that same element in mankind that so readily, arms opened, accepts a belief in a God, because it takes them out of this harsh, hard, physical existence of reality. Do you know what I mean?
I do, I think. So I think religions prey on our fears and insecurities. And I say prey because I have a specific view about it. It may be the case that religions are coddling us or giving us a warm hug about our insecurities, but I view it as preying.
I have no doubt that there are certain groups that absolutely prey on people. Absolutely.
But when it comes to like magic, like performance magic and stuff like that, I don't tend to view that in the same light. In that, people, I know there are people out there who probably want to believe in magic, that they want to believe that the world is correct.
I don't want to derail you, so I want to make sure you understood my point, because I don't want you to think I'm thinking something else. Once I learned what magic was, I realized I would rather be dismayed. I would rather be... I enjoy magic performance more when I don't know how they did it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and so what I think it is with magic, it's the same thing as with comedy and thriller movies and other things like that. It's the surprise.
Yeah.
Because we have basically evolved to be learning machines, and so when something catches us by surprise, it's a clear demonstration that there's something we have not learned yet that is out there, that is potential knowledge to gain.
Sure.
And so, like, the reason jokes are funny is because, when you get to the punchline or whatever, it's not what you expected. It's this weird twist, and it gets your brain to think in a different way. And so when you watch someone, pull their finger off, or this card that you're hanging on to, that is the ace of spades turns into a queen of hearts, that's a moment of surprise. And your brain has to work back through kind of backwards to figure out what happened. And the thing that magicians have become experts at is figuring out how we think and how we fool ourselves so that they can close off the doors in different ways so that it makes it impossible for you to trace back and figure this out. And so Teller gives a really great a talk, which is online somewhere, where he basically does a version of Miser's Dream, which is the production of coins over and over again. And he makes the point that, he'll use one method for a couple of coins and then use a different method for the next couple of coins, because your brain is seeing coins produced and it thinks that they're all being produced using the same method. And so if he produces one with his right hand and hands it to you and holds his hand open so that you can see that his right hand is now empty, that closes the door on the idea that he's just got coins tucked away in his hand. And then he produces one with his, left hand, and then maybe secrets more in his right hand. But now you know that the right hand's empty, even though it's not. And so by using these different methods, it kind of walks you down the garden path to the point where you're fenced in. You can't trace it back to figure out how it happened. And this is, it builds a little anxiety. It gives you the startle. That's why you see people laugh and giggle and snort at magic tricks as often as they're going to applaud. It's, they'll applaud secondary to appreciate the skill of the performer. But the initial response is this, the surprise and the wow.
Yeah. Huh. So my point is, and I love that. Thank you. Do you think that we all, I would hope we all have a little bit of that in us? And so, especially people who believe in a deity of some sort, do you think whenever somebody questions that, it's kind of like, oh, don't take away my magic?
It could be. Yeah, it certainly could be for some people. And we have to constantly speak in kind of generalities. I mean, I know there are people who absolutely hate magic.
Yeah.
Just can't stand it. Don't you dare show me a card trick. I will, run screaming from the room or bludgeon you or something.
Yeah.
And we're all different. But when we speak in general about who we are as a species, there's a reason that, and magic is actually probably as popular now or more popular than it's been in years. I mean, there's like 3 or 4 different shows on TV, and but I think these things kind of go through cycles as to, do we all have this capacity for wonder? I think that almost all of us do, and the people who don't probably have, some sort of condition that we would identify as some form of mental illness, not necessarily that they're, raving lunatics and dangerous, but, the people who fall on the Asperger's spectrum, who don't have the capacity to empathize very well with others, they may, some of them, not have this same sense of wonder. Their brain works differently. That's not to say that it's necessarily worse. It's just different.
I would definitely not say it is worse, because my daughter is in that spectrum, and I've learned so much about autism with that. But I love that you brought that up, and man, it's almost like you're directing the show, because to bring it back to morality, now you get into the concept of mental illness and things like that. What we consider mental illness is, I would think, subjective, right? Isn't it a societal thing where we say, okay, because they don't function on the same awareness of reality that maybe I do, then therefore there's something wrong with them?
So it depends.
And I asked that to load this. Do they have a lack of morality?
So one of the things about morality is that we tend to recognize that there's a difference between a moral duty and a moral virtue. Mm-hmm. And so if, for example, there's a kid who's wandered out into the street and a car is barreling down, you may not have a moral duty to put your own life at risk in order to save them, but it would certainly be morally virtuous for you to risk your life to save somebody else. So there's a distinction between those about what your obligation is. And we hold people morally accountable based on their ability to comprehend. So outside of Texas, we don't tend to use capital punishment on people of lower IQs and people with mental disorders, because most other states have recognized that these people have a diminished capacity to understand the consequences of their action, and this is perhaps a little exculpatory, and we should not necessarily punish someone for who they are. But when we talk about mental illnesses that distort one's internal model of reality, it's not. So when you start saying that there's nothing wrong with them because they just have a different view of reality, I think that's a mistake.
Okay.
Because in many cases, the different view of reality that they have is in fact harmful to them and others, and so that would make it wrong in the sense that it's inaccurate. Now, the fact that you might have individuals who have some mental, we call them defects, whatever, that allows them to see reality in a different way, but it's not necessarily harmful. It may give them, incredible insights. They may be able to, produce thoughts that the rest of us are incapable of that actually benefit us. Then I wouldn't necessarily say that their view of reality is wrong. That's where it's different, because not everything is necessarily. So when you're talking about morality, there are things that are moral, there are things that are immoral, and there are things that are amoral. The fact that I like strawberry
either way, yeah.
There's no moral evaluation of my taste for strawberry ice cream as opposed to chocolate ice cream. I mean,
your love for strawberries is immoral, sir.
Yeah, it's those seeds on the outside.
It's an abomination to fruit.
What kind of berry is that? Puts its seeds on the outside.
A very proud berry. Okay, so I like this.
Strawberries are the assless chaps
of your fruit salad. Okay, so I really like where you're going. So, and this is the whole beauty of this show, is we have no form. It's just, let's just explore and go in different directions. And you mentioned about a lack of empathy. Many instances we're hearing about, these awful situations where people have, brought guns into public places and slayed a bunch of people, and almost all of them, you hear the term about, they had autism or they were Asperger's or whatever. My biggest concern, obviously, as a parent of a child with that, but at the same time, I do see the lack of empathy in that, whatever they would call that, a disorder, a developmental disorder. But that lack of empathy there also, does that imply that empathy is required for what we would deem as a moral position or a morality?
I think so. I think that when we talk about morality, and I'm talking about it from, as I mentioned before, the realist point of view of the facts about reality. I think that empathy is an important fact about reality. Our ability to care about others puts us in the position of considering how our consequences can affect others. But the fact that someone has a diminished capacity for empathy, or maybe perhaps lacks empathy, doesn't necessarily mean that they are going to, or even likely to, take immoral actions, or that aren't going to understand the consequences of their actions. I mean, we don't have to go to the extremes of Dexter and him constructing a model in order to help him fit in, because I think there was an incredible flaw with that entire process, is that, the ability to see the necessity of having to fit in and then faking it is already, in a way, a demonstration of a desire to fit in or a need to fit in, something that's real about us. And I used to talk about, if you're at a restaurant and you have two kids and they're misbehaving, and you take them home, and one of them you say, okay, the next time we're at that restaurant, if you behave well, you're going to get dessert, and if you don't, you're going to get a beating. And you take the other kid and you explain that them misbehaving is affecting everybody around them, and how would they feel if they were trying to eat their meal or trying to have a conversation and somebody else was doing this, and you instill in them this different perspective that's based on empathy. When you go back to the restaurant, both of those kids will behave, or we'll just say that for the sake of argument.
Yeah.
Which one of them is more moral? And in that specific situation, you could say, well, neither of them is more moral. Their actions are all we're considering. But now, what happens later on when you take the parents and the threat of punishment or reward out of there, which one is going to continue to be moral? And that's kind of where we get to the empathy and the ability to understand, to not have a governing kind of who watches the watchers type of scenario.
It's ironic that you chose that phrase, because I can see behind you the Watchmen book.
That's actually the Watchmen Hero Clicks collection.
Oh, very nice, very nice. Yeah.
It's funny.
Go ahead, Ken.
Oh yeah, Ken's here. I forgot about.
Yeah, hey Ken. Sorry, I don't get the opportunity to speak to somebody like this, so I want to get as much as I can.
Good show, Ken. What have you got?
It's fantastic. No, that's great. And what you just said, sort of, and I brought this up in the past. Are you moral? Because if you don't steal at the store because you know that you're being watched on camera, does that make you moral? Or should you just not steal because it's not right to steal?
Yeah, there's a difference between assessing the individual action or inaction and assessing the character of the individual and saying, oh, well, because I think any of us can take moral actions and immoral actions, and it's a mistake to summarize the entirety of someone's character. So now you're talking about, what are your motivations? Are you trying to do good for the sake of doing good, or are you doing good to avoid the consequences of doing bad? And
because Yahweh said so.
Well, like the children analogy that you just used with the parents in the restaurant, it's if you are concerned with getting caught stealing from the store and getting arrested and getting in trouble and having that be your life, that's the fear of reaction. Whereas if I don't want to screw things up for this store owner, I don't want him to have to raise his prices, and that's a different level. So that I would assume that would be more empathetic, right? Because you're worried about other people's experiences as opposed to your own.
Yeah, I think it's this issue of viewing life through a very narrow scope. There's two things: are you trying to do more good, or are you trying to avoid consequences for yourself?
So what you're saying is empathy is not necessarily required for morality.
For moral action.
But it is a helping factor if you have it.
It is key to moral comprehension.
Okay.
Because somebody can do good things their entire life, and maybe secretly in their head they're a terrible person.
Right. That's me, by the way.
And by and large, what we care about is what they've done, and not what I'm strongly opposed to thought crime legislation crap, because first of all, I don't know how you could enforce it.
Minority Report.
You can't tell me what I'm thinking. You can't control what I'm thinking yet, although maybe someday you could.
Yeah.
But, like I said, those two kids in that scenario, they're both behaving correctly, or they're behaving the way, we think they should behave. But their motivations have broader consequences in how they're going to behave in different situations. And that's where you get to the, who is more morally correct in a broad sense.
And it shows that there's obviously more than one way to skin a cat.
Yeah.
I've heard the argument many, many times from people of faith that say, I don't know what I've heard Glenn Beck say, I don't know how Penn Jillette is as moral as he is an upstanding individual like he is, without the fear of God, which is sort of scary to me to think that the only reason Glenn Beck is behaving the way that he does is because, he's afraid of this punishment from the creator of the universe.
But that falls under that same analogy that Matt just gave us. Yeah, that maybe these people who have that belief in a God structure, that they don't want to get punished by God.
So I guess where I'd like to go with this is, I'd like to pose the question, what if we were able to convince everybody tomorrow that there was no supernatural legislative entity? How would people react? Because that's what I hear all the time. I don't know how people would behave if they didn't believe that God existed and that God wrote these books and that God is telling them to behave in this manner.
Yeah, and I've had people tell me that if they, because I've asked them, well, if you found out tomorrow there's no God, are you just going to run around, raping and killing people? And some of them have said yes. And wow. I generally think they're lying.
Yeah.
That they are saying that because they are trying to avoid the consequences of the question that I'm asking. There may be some people who are like that, but those people are irrespective of religion.
Yeah.
Likely they're already behaving that way.
Well, I was just going to say, okay, so if you take God out of the equation and you take, American law out of the equation, it's complete anarchy. There's no more legal crime punishment for your actions. Would you still make those choices? Do you know what I mean? Like, if you could that's the question, is if you could get away with anything, would you still do it? And I think that's where you have that clear split between people who are concerned with their own well-being and then people who are concerned with the well-being of everything around them.
Yeah, I'd like to think, despite what some religions claim, that people are generally good and that people are generally capable of understanding that we're stuck on this ball, we have to share space, my actions have consequences for other people as well. But we know that, for example, I believe it was somewhere in Canada when the police went on strike and the place just turned into a looting fest. So we know that there's some significant or non-trivial portion of the population that still needs a sky daddy or police cameras or whatever to keep them in line.
Big brother.
And the solution, to me, as with most things, I suspect, is education and teaching people how to understand the consequences of their actions.
Every single podcast we do, Matt, the answer always ends up being, we just need more education.
And every debate that I've done, with the exception of the debate with Cy, no matter what the initial topic of the conversation was, whether it's, does God exist, should America be a Christian nation, whatever, every one of those debates has come down to a discussion about morality. It is the single sticking point. And, people will say that, religions poison you and then offer you the antidote. And that's their view of what they're talking about with morality. I think that religions don't do that. I think they convince you you're poisoned when you're not and then offer you a homeopathic cure.
It's very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, I got to tell you. First of all, I know we're running short on time, and Matt, I really appreciate you talking with us. I'm having a blast. I love these conversations, and I love the opportunity to share them with you and with Ken. I can absolutely unequivocally say that you absolutely helped me come to maybe not an answer, but a definite clearer understanding of the dichotomy between self-preservation morality and the morality of what's good for those in your environment. The two children analogy, I think that's great. I'm definitely going to use that more when I talk to people.
I love that particular analogy. And one of the things, not to sidetrack you again.
Not at all.
Is this? Well, now I completely forgot what I was going to say. So it doesn't matter.
Or does it? There's no way to prove it. Oh man, this is so good. Well, Matt.
These are the kind of conversations that I like to have. One of the things that people would say is, well, first of all, atheists often get how can you be an atheist? You're so nice, kind of what Ken was saying about, Glenn and Penn. And that's a strange pairing of friends there, but, if it works, great. But the other thing is this idea that, I don't know, there's not an easy way to actually phrase this. So they will say that atheists are somehow the equivalent of fundamentalists, that that I'm out there trying to steal away people's hope. And I would love to, my ultimate goal is to change the world. I want a world free of religion, superstition, irrational thinking. But I'd never support any legislation or force to do it. I want people to give it up on their own for good reasons. And the people who say that if they stopped believing in God, they would, rape and murder people, I want them to keep right on believing until they find a really good reason.
Yeah, exactly.
Keep your ass in church. But this thing that, what I'm doing is kind of the same as others. I've never gone door to door knocking, hey, have you stopped believing in Jesus yet? I can help.
Yeah.
I don't make outgoing calls on the show. I want to engage the people who want to have the conversations, which is why our show is a call-in show and not a call-out show.
Right. Let me tell you about no news. That's amazing. Matt, it is so refreshing to hear that. It really is, because, as a Christian, I'm often criticized for being too lackadaisical with my position. And I think it's really just a matter of I like to listen to people, and I like to let people talk, and I like to hear what they're saying and actually consider what they're saying, as opposed to placating them or having an ulterior motive. But there are definitely Christians out there who do that, and I know that there's definitely atheists out there who do behave the way that you were mentioning, and it's frustrating. It's absolutely frustrating when people like yourself and myself are actually just trying to figure it all out,
And I've actually said before, this tends to shock some people, I'm a better person overall.
Hello.
Hey, Ken, welcome back. I'm a better person than I was overall than I was when I was a Christian. I would have most definitely, as a Christian, I would have attacked Dave nonstop for being a shitty Christian.
Yeah.
Because I took this stuff seriously, and it, even as an atheist, even putting that kind of hat back on a little bit, I'm bothered by the people who don't take their religion seriously because they believe something. It definitely has consequences. Penn has talked about how big of a dick do you have to be to not tell somebody that they're going to hell if you actually think that they are.
Yeah.
Which I'm not necessarily saying you do, but
I don't, because I don't know enough about it.
Well, see, there you go.
And that's really, that's just the end of the story. That I just don't know enough about it, and I'm not an idiot. So I try not to do that sort of thing. And I'd love to chat with you more off air. I think it'd be fun, and we'd love to have you back on the show, Matt. It was an absolute pleasure to have you. And
maybe next time I can talk to Ken.
Yeah, Ken, man, what's up, dude?
Hey, as Matt said before, and I prefer myself having those conversations with non-believers, and so I was happy to just sit back and sort of let you guys have the conversation, because I tend to agree a lot with Matt. So,
which means you're correct.
And I'll tell you, it's just a great opportunity that I had to share, my time so that I could, learn a little bit from you, Matt. I think that's neat. And Ken, without you, we wouldn't have had this opportunity, so it's perfect.
Well, and the show's not about me. It's about reaching out to people and getting them to think and getting them to have these kinds of discussions with each other, and to do what we've all done here today. So,
and not only that, but Ken's going to come down and hang out here in Austin here before too long. So
yes,
talk to him more then.
Give me a couple of months, and I may come down here too.
Sweet.
I'll tell you what. Yeah, as a person, as a free thinker, I can honestly say that I'm not one for outreach. As a Christian, I definitely want to encourage anyone to take the necessary time to educate themselves, to do what it takes for them to figure out what they need to figure out. I personally, I did that. I'm constantly doing that. It's a constant daily evaluation for me personally, and I love considering all possibilities. I haven't been personally given enough to have me say, okay, well, it's absolutely not God. For me personally.
Oh, we got to talk.
We can, and we definitely will.
Because that's not my position.
Yeah, I know it's not. I know it's not.
It's a shifting of the burden of proof.
Yeah, no, and I understand that, and I respect that completely. And I'm also very aware of my lack of effort in getting what I'm looking for. But like I'm saying, I feel like everybody should have the opportunity to just figure it out, just do it themselves. So I'm never one to shove a Bible down somebody's throat. I joke with Ken all the time. He references Scripture more than I ever do. I don't think I've ever referenced Scripture except maybe the very first episode when I talked about Jesus. But above and beyond that, I mean, I think Ken has read the Bible more often than I had. And, you know, for me personally, I know that I have a lot more to learn. And I enjoy the journey of learning. And that's absolutely the reason why we're doing this. And I absolutely respect you for what you do, and I think it's great, and I want nothing but good things for you, man. And would love to have you back on to talk about something completely different.
Well, whenever you guys want. I'm now self-employed. I'm now, after 10 years or more of doing this, a professional godless heathen. So my schedule's a little more flexible than when I was working software.
Congratulations. That's fantastic.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Well, thanks everybody for tuning in. Be sure to send us an email. Give us your thoughts. pushthebuttonpodcast@gmail.com. Tell Ken we want to hear more from him on the next episode. I'm so sorry, Ken. But yeah, I once Matt started rolling, I just wanted to keep asking questions because it was like this big knowledge dump for me. Just so you know, it was very good for me. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I enjoyed it as well. So.
And thanks so much for having me. I respect anybody who's willing to have the conversation and let me take a big knowledge dump on their head.
Hey, all right. I got to go wash off now. So thanks, everybody, for listening to Push the Button Podcast. We'll see you next week.
Mr. Anderson.
Don't push it.